Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who joined today's webcast. I just wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar featuring teams from WhereScape, HVR, and Progressive Leasing. Today we'll be discussing how Progressive Leasing accelerated their data warehousing projects through automation and replication. Before I hand you over to our hosts, Satish and Trivani, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. We've done a sound check, but if you have any issues hearing us at any time during the webcast, please just send us a chat, which can be found on the bottom of your screen. Please note that everyone should be muted on this webcast. That way we don't have any extra background noise, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask any questions you may have. If you do have any questions, feel free to submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of the screen. And we'll address any questions immediately following the presentation. So feel free to ask away and we'll get to them by the end of the webcast. Without further ado, Satish, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Christine. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can we move to the next slide here? The next one. All right. So we have been building data warehouses for a few decades now. Taking a certain approach. Data warehouse projects. Whether you're doing a modern data warehouse, which includes cloud and other pieces that are increasing the complexity of a data warehouse project, the approach is still stays the same, and there are some problems that are associated with these traditional way of doing a data warehouse. Now, I'm going to highlight some of them here. Hand coding and manual processes. Traditionally, people have, developers hand coded the data integration, the data movement with their language of choice. Most of the times it's SQL that is native to that particular database platform. Or in some cases, they may have used some other language to move this data into a structured model. This takes, a long time. It's very lengthy. It could be an expensive proposition. And there are a lot of problems associated with this kind of projects just because of the cost, the time it takes, the complexity involved, and the skills needed. So usually they are they lack the agility. You build something, you show it to the business, and the business gets sometimes surprised by what they see because they did not expect that to be the case with their data. And now they have seen a problem that they just uncovered at that time, and they're going to ask the IT to go back and make that change. Everything else is good, but these these three things have to be changed. Now you have to go back and make that change. Make sure you iterate through that whole deployment process and get to the business again. But this takes time in this traditional approach. Standardization and best practices. A lot of times what we do is we create them standardized documents, some internal standards, whether it's naming or some other process. And we give these documents to our developers and we rely on the developers to enforce these standards. Best practices. Best practices are things, when you're taking a certain methodology, you want to make sure you do this and follow these best practices. Again, we rely again on these best practices, on the developers to incorporate these best practices. The problem with that is not all developers are the same. I mean, they have different skills, different levels of experience, different tastes, and so on. So you might have an inconsistent product or output. Documentation. Documentation is usually an afterthought. We spend a long time building this stuff, and we might document, and even if you do, it becomes stale the minute after it's documented pretty much. technical debt is built up because of that. So the next time when you have to go back and make a change in the data warehouse, it's going to be even more expensive now. Tribal knowledge. You have people working for a long time in these organizations in a team, and one day someone who knows a lot of stuff about the data and about the processes, about the technical details, leaves, and the rest of the team is left in dark. And that creates a problem. So all of this creates an overhead. It's very hard for IT to keep up with the business demand. So these are some of the problems that we have seen in the traditional approach. Can we move to the next slide? Here is another way of kind of representing this technical approach that we have taken to build these data warehouses. As you can see, this is a staircase representing all the steps that are involved in a data warehouse. At the bottom, starting with requirements, and as you move up the ladder, you can see there is a framework that you have to come up with. If you don't know the source system data, you may have to profile the data. Then your data modeling team might come up with the data model that a target model. And then you have to kind of plan some storage, do ETL, version the code, orchestrate some workflows, deploy the code, maintain, and finally document. Now there's a lot of steps involved. So what is the problem with this approach? There's a lot of tools involved here. So the problem is you have these tools that are very good at doing a particular task. And these tools also require some specialized skills, meaning now you might have different teams doing different steps. So which creates a lot of overhead, and it becomes very complicated to orchestrate all of this, taking a requirement and taking it all the way and deploy it. Which means this process does not align well with an agile methodology. If you have to build something in 2 weeks and deploy it, with this kind of overhead, with this kind of complexity involved, it's just going to be very hard to do anything in 2 weeks. Your data modeler could do, with some assumptions, they come up with some model and they give it to the ETL. ETL starts building it. They find a problem. They come back to the modelers. The modelers have to change the model and hand it back to the ETL. That takes a lot of time. You can't really do anything tangible in a matter of 2 weeks. So how do we solve this? Next slide, please. So this is exactly the problem that we're trying to solve with Wherescape. What we're seeing is this traditional way is very good. I mean, this is the IT approach, the best way to do it. However, it takes really, really long time. You can't take shortcuts here. You cannot skip steps because that will create technical debt, cause a lot of problems down the road. We know that. And if you don't deliver on time, of course, business takes an alternative route and takes matters into their own hands, which might be even worse. So Wherescape is exactly trying to solve this problem. And the way we do it is, we call it data warehouse automation. And we take this life cycle and we say, are there any patterns at every step of this life cycle that we can automate? If we can automate these patterns, then we make the developer's life much easier and help them focus on the business problem rather than the mundane tasks that are part of the life cycle. And these could be, creating tables, creating indexes, versioning the code, generating the code itself, all of those, deploying, documentation, all these pieces. If we can automate and assist the developer, then the developers can actually focus on the real problem at hand. And we do this automation at every step of the life cycle, not just one thing, not just one code generation or just a model creation, but we're talking about end-to-end. Design, develop, document, deploy, and operate. And the way we do this is by taking a metadata-driven approach. So the metadata is our secret sauce to be able to do these things. The built-in methodologies. So we try to incorporate these methodologies into the tool so the developers don't have to remember. In other words, the tool is intelligent about the methodology that you chose. If you're doing a star schema, the tool understands what a dimension is, what a fact table is, what a surrogate key is, what a type 2 dimension is, and so on. If you're doing a data vault, then it understands what a hub is, what is satellite, what is a link. You know, all that is built into the tool. So it's more intelligent than just moving data from point A to point B. Best practices, industry standards. By incorporating all these things into the tool, you are getting a very high quality output, high quality product, you know, at the end of the development lifecycle. And we talked about documentation and lineage. In my previous experience, when we build something, you know, goes into production, now business starts asking, how did you get this metric? We used to spend days to figure that out. Go back into packages, go back to the code sometimes, trying to understand all that. To uncover that one single question, it just takes a lot of time. How about having lineage that would let you just right click and track back all the way to the source to figure out what's happening with this particular data metric. So that's the lineage that we're talking about in this automation. And if you repeat that over and over, you get a tremendous amount of value, right? In time savings and so on. And one more thing is data warehouse automation is not, again, as I mentioned, it's not about one particular thing, because if you do only one or two things in the life cycle, then you're still stuck with not being able to deploy it all the way. So you still have a bottleneck. So we are talking about the full lifecycle management, all the way from discovering something from the source systems to take it all the way and documenting it after deployment. Next slide, please. Just to summarize what automation is and how, you know, we are seeing this adopted in a lot of companies. The value what we are getting is by automating data warehouse patterns, teams can deliver faster and high quality products at a faster pace. You can be more agile. Reduce complexity of new technologies and data platforms. This is a big thing because we are seeing cloud technologies, cloud data warehouses. We are seeing a growth in the data volumes, structured data, unstructured data, streaming. All of these pieces increase the complexity. All of these pieces have their own best way of doing things, own like scripts and the intricacies for each of these technologies. As it is, it was very hard to keep up with the data warehouse. Now with all these additional technologies, there are a lot more moving parts. How about the taking away that complexity, regardless of that new platform? So there is this fantastic new cloud data warehouse that you want to modernize to, but you are kind of scared that it might take a lot of time to learn that new technology. But if you have an automation tool that actually understands that technology, generates the code, and does it in the best way possible for that native platform, then it relieves the developers that learning curve. The learning curve is going to be very low. So it reduces the risk of that project to, you know, failure. So, and again, as I said, because we adopt best practices, you know, you don't have to worry about inconsistent code or inconsistent quality in the product. So automation quickly helps you evolve, react to change, and be agile. And by doing all of these, of course, you're going to deliver your product at a less cost. Next slide, please. So Wherescape primarily has 3 products. One is called the Wherescape 3D, which is a data discovery, data modeling, data profiling product. And the other is the Wherescape Red, which is the build automation. So this is the one, it actually builds your tables, builds the indexes, generates the code, versions the code, generates the documentation, generates the lineage. Now 3D is more of a modeling tool. It might resemble more like any data modeling tool that you are familiar with. The difference being whatever you do in 3D, whatever model that you build, and a lot of times you can auto-generate a model, but that model can be pushed to Red. And Red can build those tables, generate the code based on that mappings and everything. So you're not writing a lot of code, you're not manually managing all of this. And so these two products work hand in hand. And the other product that we have, which is called Data Vault Express. Data Vault Express is primarily targeted towards people who are, thinking of building a data vault, teams that are thinking of building, taking a data vault methodology as their data warehousing project. So that's where Data Vault Express comes into play. So that's a summary of what we do and what we are trying to solve. With that, I would like to hand it over to Srivani from HVR. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satish. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Srivani.
Perfect. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am Srivani Abaraju. I am the Director of Product Management here at HVR. For those that do not know what HVR is, it stands for High Volume Replicator. The solution that we offer to our customers is the ability to do real-time data replication using change data capture technology. We'd love to talk to you a lot more about HVR, but really the goal of this webinar was to, sort of get everybody on this call sort of familiar with the Wherescape technology, HVR technology, and show how the solution is better together and how Progressive Leasing has deployed it in their environment. So I really have like 3 or 4 slides from here, and then we'll have the bulk of the conversation with our customers towards the last 20+ minutes of this conversation. So don't miss out on that piece. So like I said, HVR is a real-time log-based change data capture technology to be able to replicate data from any which way. Your databases could be on the in your data center on premise, or your target destination databases, like Satish said, but there could be a new and more exciting cloud-based data warehousing technology that you would like to adopt. It really doesn't matter. And the way we fit in with the Wherescape technology is at the data ingest phase of your ETL processing. However, before we dive deeper into specifically what log-based CDC is, let's take a step back, and I want to follow the same train of thought, how today there's a need to modernize your ETL workflows, your data warehouses. So should your tooling, your legacy tooling, continue to be following those legacy technologies, or should we reconsider the processes that have been in vogue for the last 2+ decades? So over the, again, ETL technologies, data movement technologies are not earth-shattering, right? They've been around for like 20+ years now. However, in the traditional methodology of moving data, you typically had an application system that's processing hundreds and thousands of transactions. It could be an e-commerce application, for example. It could be taking in orders. It's a customer-facing application, revenue-generating application. The heart of every application is a database. Your application is processing orders, placing orders, changing your shipping address, billing address. It's interacting with your end users. And when it came to BI and analytics, the traditional approach has been to be able to extract data at certain batches, at certain intervals. Used to be nightly batch loads, over a period of time it became a window of a few hours, and there's still some customers that do hourly workloads. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that because it's directly impacting, it's directly querying the application database itself, the source system is overloaded with the analytics queries. And you'll hear Progressive Leasing folks talk about how if a query runs for over, if a BI or an analyst query runs for over 5 minutes, the application DBA is killing that query. So you wanted to, the impact to the application databases is a crucial consideration from that perspective. So what happens when you have source database overload? Your application performance would dip. And because this is revenue generating applications, you know, you'd get calls from executive management. You probably don't want to get, you know, odd hours. At the same time, we're no longer moving data between an on-premise database to another on-premise analytics database. In this day and age, you know, most customers are deploying their data warehouses in the cloud. What that means is because you're moving large amounts of data at a time, you do have those network and compute utilization spikes, right? And then most cloud vendors charge you for the high water mark of the network utilization. So that's a cost consideration you need to take into account when I'm taking this traditional approach. Also, the bigger problem with this traditional approach is the fact that you're just capturing the end state. You're not capturing the intermediary stages. As your user is transacting with your application, it's updating the database. So you're only capturing that end state and not the transitionary states. Now let's switch over into log-based CDC and how that's better and more suited for cloud data warehousing. First of all, like I said, log-based CDC has been around for, you know, at least 2.5 decades. And customers have typically used it for use cases like high availability, disaster recovery, or one-time migrations with a zero impact to the application database. They typically call it zero impact migrations or zero downtime migrations. But over the past 4 to 5 years, we've seen a transition of, you know, customers deploying log-based CDC, not just for migrations or multi-master peer-to-peer replications, but this technology has become a lot more suited because it's very transactional, just like it says, right? Every time there is a transaction that changes the state of the application database, we're taking that single transaction and moving it over the network into the cloud data warehouse. What does that give you? It gives you the nimbleness and the agility of moving one transaction at a time. At the same time, because you're only moving committed transactions, or that's how HVR does. We only move committed transactions. So you could have 1 million operations, but until that transaction is committed, we actually don't change the destination database. What does that give you? It gives you transactional consistencies, maintaining transaction boundaries across different transactions. Also, because log-based CDC specifically is not hitting the source database, it's typically reading a file system. It's typically reading your recovery logs. In the case of Oracle database, it's a Oracle redo log. In the case of SQL Server database, it's a transaction log. For Postgres, it's wall logs, you know, so on and so forth. Because we're leaving the database itself alone, the impact to application is minimal to none in many cases. And because we're pointing to the file system, we're happy to promote the use of agents and things like that, which I'll talk to you in a second. Also, with the likes of HVR, not only are you moving smaller amounts of transactional data, but HVR can do out-of-the-box compression. That means you're utilizing your network, you're amplifying the available bandwidth for you, so you don't hit those compute and network spikes as you would in the traditional approach. Also, because as a user is transacting with the database, we're moving the transactions over to the destination data warehouse. That means you now have an opportunity to capture historical information. And this, and again, the analytics use cases around customer behavior, customer sentiment, and customer journey is extremely valuable if you have that historical information. So there are some considerations, not just in terms of the technology of log-based CDC, but an overall architecture itself that we're seeing our customers benefit from, and certainly Progressive Leasing will speak in a few minutes here. We'll also have benefits from this kind of architecture. But you know, typically, you know, solution architectures could be point-to-point, centralized, or distributed. When it comes to deploying data warehouses in the cloud or moving large volumes of data, we know that distributed architecture performs the best in terms of moving large volumes of data at lowest latency. In the case of HVR, what you see here is a set of source databases sitting, in this case, as an example, sitting in the on-premise data center of a customer. And we do have an orchestration point, which we call as HVR Hub. And that HVR Hub is actually orchestrating the replication between the on-prem application databases to the destination cloud data warehouse. Distributed architecture works best because, one, we're doing the filtering and processing and enrollment of data, only of the required data, and only that is moving over the fence, moving over the network. Also because we're able to deploy sort of a firewall, because imagine if you had a solution that requires you to open up the firewall from the cloud back into your data center. That would be a nightmare for most chief security officers. In the cases of, like in the case of HVR, if you can open the firewall just to the HVR hub with using a proxy, then the hub will make the communication with the source database. Also, distributed architecture suits best because we're doing the enrollment and filtering at the source database level. We're doing the data type conversions and coercions on the target side. So the processing itself, the compute is distributed across different nodes. Also, because when data is in motion, HVR comes built in with inter-agent communication being encrypted and compressed. The customers can leverage encrypted data transfer across trusted entities, in this case, HVR Hub to HVR agent on the target side. Okay. HVR supports any cloud-based data warehouse platform like Snowflake, Teradata, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Amazon Redshift. These are from a destination perspective. There's a host of databases we support, from a replication from source relational databases into replication into many SQL and NoSQL databases. Together, HVR and Wherescape are in the business of delivering the fastest data, freshest, so they can make so customers can make decisions on freshest data set available. We do that through real-time data movement using HVR and an end-to-end automation using Wherescape, as you just saw in Shrikant's presentation. I'm sorry, Satish's presentation. I'm already thinking about the next speakers coming up here. With that said, I do want to bring to the panel the customer who is being showcased here. Progressive Leasing is a great customer of both Wherescape and HVR. And here we have two members from their team, and I would like to start by asking them to introduce yourselves. Shrikant, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hello all, my name is Shrikant and I'm a lead business intelligence engineer in the data integration team. Been with Progressive for over 4 years. We manage the data platform for Progressive.
Excellent. May I ask Nuzef, our second speaker, to introduce himself as well?
Hi there, I'm Nuzef Sayed. I'm another BI engineer on the Progressive side, on the same team on the integration side of the analytical domain that we have here.
Excellent. Well, so first off, what is Progressive Leasing? What do you guys do as a company? And tell us why, automation and data ingest using HVR's log-based CDC. Why is all of this data meaningful for the success of your business?
Sure. So Progressive Leasing is a virtual lease-to-own purchase option that we offer. It's a very customer-centric product in terms of the purchase and payment experience that we offer. We integrate with different merchants to actually sell out the product they're trying to sell. So to do all this and have the best customer experience and the best experience for even the integration with our merchants, Progressive heavily relies on technology. We try to see what's going to be the best option to deliver either to the customer or even the internal stakeholders. Data being meaningful, all the decisions that Progressive makes across all our departments, say from our operation side of the businesses or the product roadmap that we are developing, even the development lifecycle, the processes, every single thing is driven through the data that we gather from different sources. You can also think about like all the decisions that we make. Do we approve this customer? Do we not? Is also going through our decisioning algorithms, which also ingest data from different sources like the credit bureaus or even the past data that we have gathered within the product itself. You can also think about the call center that we run. Which customers should we be targeting at what time of the day, and how many customer representatives should we have during, say, certain holiday seasons or it's a downtime. So every single decision is made through data. And to do that, we need a good real-time data coming in, and also being able to give access to our stakeholders to look into the data, and they don't have to wait for a week or two just requesting that, hey, I need this data. So all these products, the two HVR and Wherescape combined, are solving that for us.
Excellent. So it sounds like having real-time data and also delivering it in shortest possible time through automation is sort of the lifeblood for your business, right? So from that perspective, I'm positive that you guys have infrastructure to support that kind of delivery mechanisms. Could you talk to us a little bit about your ecosystem in terms of what database stack you have, what application stack you have, what kind of tooling you have, so on and so forth. That way we know the lay of your land.
Sure. Before HVR and Wherescape, our databases are SQL Server on the source side and on the data warehouse side. We use SSIS heavily to bring the data to our warehouses, and since applications are evolving so fast to improve our product offering to market, we have to do a lot of SSIS changes. So we thought like, okay, let's make it automate. And we use the business intelligence markup language to automate our SSIS package. And still we are not fast enough to capture the source side changes. And to rebuild the data warehouse, every time there is a change on the source, we have to pull all the data with the real time and the history data, and we are impacting a lot of source resources. And we started looking at implementing our operational data store, and we figured out having an automation or a streaming technology like HVR and automation tool to build our warehouse will help us a big time. So that's when we started looking at these products.
Very good. Are you able to share anything around how big your database is? How many users would be probably serviced? I mean, obviously it looks like you're providing data as a service to your end users, right? So any idea on, either the number of data centers, number of databases, approximately? I know there are information that are proprietary to you guys, but is it in the order of hundreds or is it in the order of dozens?
Sure. Our data warehouse right now is around 15 to 20 terabytes, and this doesn't include our ODS. And we have around 40 to 50 data sources roughly on the source side. We have to go get the data and put it in the ODS with extra information. And on top of it, we are building a history right now with HVR. What it helps is at any given time, if we decided to change our logic, we can go to our operational data store and rebuild our warehouse without impacting the source. And to come to like number of users, we have a big operations team. There are tons of reports, Power BI, SSRS, Excel reporting, all kind of reporting going over there. I would say like 200 to 300 people access our reporting on a daily basis. These are just end users. On top of it, we have like a product owners and other kind of business users. They just want to get their hands dirty with the data, go try different things and get some insights from it. We have a lot of business users who wants to dig into the data and find some valuable information.
So the impact there is phenomenal, right? If you didn't have the data available in real time, if you're not able to meet the requirements of this 200, 300 plus users, applications, application owners, product owners, then so agility is very important for you, would you say?
Yes.
Excellent. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how, from an end-to-end perspective, what is your data warehousing process and how did Wherescape help you automate it?
So the end-to-end process, again, with HVR, that's been a really crucial part for us. HVR is like the backbone for our data warehousing. Like you already mentioned, it's replicating data in real time. So I'm not impacting on my source system when I'm maybe doing a full refresh, reading, I'm not causing any blocking or anything. So we've built ODS using our HVR. So we have all the data in raw form with like a history table as well and a one-to-one replication as well. Now from there, Wherescape sits on top of that. Now with Wherescape, all the technical knowledge that an engineer would have to have, like, hey, I'm building a stored procedure, I need to do this, I need to think about how it's gonna read the data and how long would it read, how much blocking would it do. I mean, all those technical decisions or the requirement that an engineer would have is gone. All our engineers now are thinking of how the data should look on the data warehousing side. How would it be meaningful for our consumers? The modeling is the aspect they're only thinking about, not the implementation and the technical stuff. So with Wherescape, that's been phenomenal. It has, all you do is like a couple of clicks, create a table, a dimension, a fact, and you're done. And like Satish also mentioned, the development cycle also accelerates quite a bit from there.
That's great. So from that perspective, what was your solution prior to having HVR and Wherescape? I know, Shrikant, you touched on having SSIS packages using BIML that did not meet your data delivery requirements. Could you talk about some friction points and how that impacted your business? Because obviously what Nazair stated was, you know, the real-time ingest, building your ODS using HVR, automation on top of it with Wherescape sort of helped you guys change your mindset in terms of servicing your customer. But give us a picture of what it was before you implemented that solution.
Sure. With the BIML, we found some patterns and we automated the patterns to build an SSIS package on fly and get the data. But if the database engineer on the source side went and changed the column name or added a column or deleted a column, then data warehouse engineer has to go and change our packages to get that change, or we have to wait for a couple of sprints to get that data. HVR has this cool feature. I really like it. It's called AdaptDDL. All it does is it detects the change real time and issues the appropriate command to create on our ODS. Your data is available immediately if the source changes. That is a huge value for us to get the new data insight. Let's say we are integrating with a big partner and they made a couple of changes and a lot of end users are expecting some kind of reporting real time. We don't have to worry about telling people, hey, this needs to change an SSIS package, we need to build it. That whole time for the market is like literally few minutes. All we go is make sure if that data is present, if it is missing anything, if we need to bring any other extra lookup data, just everything is there in the ODS on day one.
Got it.
And also, like from a friction point, the company is growing like exponentially. Data, we are giving more product offerings, and data is just getting huge. But BI was kind of becoming a bottleneck. People just waiting for the data, like Shrikant just mentioned. Now they don't have to. I don't even have to be in the deployment. If the application is making a change, let them make the change, and we'll deal with it. The data will already be there.
So what you just highlighted there is so valuable, right? I mean, if you think about the schema in most companies, and I've been in the data management and data replication business for at least 17 years now, most companies running a traditional data warehousing stack have this committee for determining the schema of what they're going to provide to the end users. So they have to make assumptions about what the business users would probably want to have. So from, like Shrikant said, when there's a change in the schema of the source database, then somebody has to go figure out the priority of adding those newly added columns, or the about to be deleted columns or table structures, in terms of how it would impact the end user reports. Now you're like, well, every team is autonomous, every team is working in a pod, make the changes you need. Replication will take care of the schema changes. Automation will take care of the data delivery the way end users need. Would you say that's the case right now, Nazef?
That's perfectly correct.
Yeah. The only change we'll have to do is basically if it's the new column and we wanted to add into our dimension and facts, that's where we will use Wherescape, and even that helps us just do it in a couple of minutes instead of hours.
Yeah, nowadays, I mean, I can compare last year mindset of our team, like, oh, we need to implement this, versus how we provide value to Progressive in terms of reporting and dashboarding, so business users can do their job proactively. Instead of reactive work, we are doing more of proactive work.
Great. What can you tell us in terms of the volume of data that you guys are looking at it? I mean, obviously your company is growing, and like a lot of virtual lending companies, right? So how is that data growth impacting your business in general?
Sure. I think we are growing by 30 to 40% year over year on the data volume. The number of customer applies for this purchase option. Right now, one of our biggest data is our call center data. The interactions we do with our customers and the recordings and all that stuff, it's a huge data. Having that and the data gets constantly updated. We want to look at the patterns, how the data is changing, how the customers are being interacted from our operations. Having this history, again, we are making the volume double from the history. So to build our proper warehouses, I think we transfer around a couple of gigs every hour on each channel. So when I say each channel, it's per database. Our interaction database is little more than that, and it's like it runs like 18 to 19 hours a day. So that's a good size data with the high volume. Yep.
Great. I mean, that's pretty typical of what we're seeing in this day and age, right? Most customers, on an average, see about 15 to 20% data growth. You guys are seeing at 30 to 40%. Again, a testament of your own company's growth and how you guys are you're probably mining more data than anybody else would. So that kind of explains it as well. So from a rollout perspective, when you first picked, and there's some audience in here that may be thinking about how they can benefit from HVR Wherescape joint solution. Can you talk about your journey in terms of how you started rolling out one solution? Which one was it? How did you kind of set up your milestones throughout a full-blown production rollout? If you give us some idea on your journey, I think others would benefit from it as well.
Sure. We first got to know about Wherescape from the TDWI conference. We learned, okay, cool, all the modeling perspective can be automated, which is the most meaningful thing that we could deliver to the customer, and the automation it provides. So we started from there, and then we were introduced about HVR through them. The rollout plan it was for us to basically first get comfortable with the tools. Like if HVR now is reading from a source system, constantly is reading the logs, how does it impact? So we went through a good POC on the BI team itself. Then we had to now also convince our data administration team, the infrastructure team, of what impact would it actually have. So those were the only points that might have taken longer to actually just convince the business that it does not introduce risk. Once we were past that, it's a smooth sailing since then.
And Nizef and I were, before we even present this use case to our infra and administrator, even our the whole business user, we would go and profile the SQL. We use SQL Server Profiler heavily just to know what the product is doing. If we are comfortable answering the questions how the tool is working, we win half, right? So if we take a feature and we implement it, we profile it and see what it is doing behind the scenes. And we documented all of them. It was a huge win because administrators are, they know how the SQL Server works, right? When we gave the like, hey, this is what it is doing when you click this. It's not going and doing something on the production system. All it is trying to do is read and replicate the data after compression. That was a huge win for us.
Yeah, like the percentage of resources it would have on the source system was also minimum. I mean, everything checked out. It was pretty smooth.
Very good. So from a technical perspective, you were able to, really get into the weeds about the impact of the source systems, the time to market, and demonstrate to your application DBAs that the solution you're about to propose is minimal risk, so to speak. What about one level higher? Because a lot of customers do also, again, there's probably folks in here that are thinking about, well, from a technical perspective, this is a good fit, but what kind of business justification did your management request of you? And what are some business benefits you were able to kind of share with them to help make their decision process easy?
So we did an ROI on these projects. We kind of came up with the use case, creating an exercise package, how much an engineer is spending time on it. We have around like 20 engineers on our warehouse. Everybody is doing end-to-end. And we put all those numbers together and we came up with a number, and we went with the bucket of HVR, and without no code changes, what does it look like from the cost perspective, and effort of every engineer and the time saving. All that math worked pretty well. Even it was more cheaper with the HVR for implementing these, creating these data pipelines. So it was an easy win to convince our business user that we're gonna provide more value with these tools to the business and the product enhancement.
Very good. How about the ROI on automation as well? I bet there's got to be productivity and efficiency improvements because of the automation piece through Wherescape. Was that sort of bundled in from end-to-end perspective, or was that separate?
Yes. We took both the tools and we gave a perspective of with these tools and without these tools, how long it takes to create a dashboard, a new data source or a data source constantly changing. And the good thing is we also kind of put our documentation time, right? The constantly telling every business user, this is how you have to use the data. Hey, this is a non-additive measure. Don't do the sum on it. This is a semi-additive measure. You just have to take these two rows and then sum it up, that it makes sense, because a lot of users are Excel users. They would just go and pivot it and try to come up with these numbers. And those numbers wouldn't tie with the rest of the dashboarding. So our engineers has to spend a lot of time helping them. But the Wherescape documentation, while we code, we set the examples. Hey, this is how the data looks. These are the example queries to get this measure, or to look into data. This is how you do it. While we code, we are putting all this metadata in the Wherescape. When we deploy to production, all we go and do is generate the document. It generates this cool data flow with the glossary. It makes more sense. Every time a new business owner or existing business owner has a question, we would just send this wiki link with this PDF document. It's awesome. They don't even have to worry about texting us in the 5 in the evening because they have to generate some metric for an officer or CEO or CFO or whatever. It was a huge win for us. Everybody's time is well spent in that perspective.
So I'm not surprised that you being a developer, you find the documentation piece and you highlighted it. I think documentation is every developer's lowest preference to be able to do manual, but it's also the efficiency piece of it, right? I mean, it's automated, so there's no room for manual errors, and it's also more generated through the code, so it's accurate, you know that for sure. And like you said, the time and efficiency improvements are substantial. Does FD want to add anything to that?
Yes, since Progressive uses data heavily, they always have questions. How did you come up with this metric? Engineer, whoever built, have to go and help them to understand this thing. So, yeah.
And it really pleases our governance team too, that things are documented. This is what this specific column means. Don't interpret it in a different way.
Exactly, especially if you have, 40, 50 data sources on the source side. How do you know which piece of data, who is the customer ID, which table did it come from, that kind of stuff, right? So you're able to trace back your metadata to the origin point as well. Excellent. So that kind of, I just have one last question and we'll open up the floor for Q&A. Can you talk a little bit about some expansion? What other use cases are you looking to expand, if at all? I mean, if there's none, that's fine, but are there other use cases you're looking to expand potentially in 2020 with this joint solution?
I mean, with Wherescape, it also offers so many integrations, even consuming web APIs. That's one thing we will start leveraging instead of writing custom code within our SSIS packages in the script task. Try to automate that, make some templates out of it. That's one of the things that we really want to do. And then as we are also looking into going to cloud, this is where Wherescape will really help us, putting all the models and everything there, and also HVR also supports so many cloud platforms that we can just host all of our ODS platform onto the cloud.
Very good. Excellent. Well, this has been pretty helpful. So if we were to wrap up, I think this slide speaks to all of what you've just stated in the last 20 plus minutes, right? So eliminating the need for hand coding, being able to save time, and what used to take, days is now your data is available in minutes. So that kind of sums up the value of HVR and Wherescape. And for everybody else, just to do a quick wrap up, with HVR and Wherescape, the solution helps you with, scalable real-time data replication through streamlined approach. You can have, we support initial data loads with schema changes completely automated through log-based CDC, and with Wherescape, you're able to quickly design, develop, deploy, operate with simple maintenance from both ends. So with that wrap up, I want to open up for questions, and Christine, off to you. Do we have good questions that we can interact with?
We had a few great questions come in. I think we have time for probably one or two. So if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up directly with you following the webcast with answers for your questions. So quickly, the first is for you, Shravani. They said, I'm interested in HVR, but I'm concerned that HVR constantly reading a transaction log could impact the performance of that transaction log and therefore the performance of the source database. Wondering if HVR has the ability to read from transaction log backup files rather than the active transaction log file.
Very much so. HVR supports reading from archive logs, backup logs, and that feature is out of the box. So you don't have to worry about always reading from the online transaction logs. You can read from backups or archives as well.
Great. Thanks, Shravani. And then the next question is for you, Satish. How is your tool different from an ETL tool?
Yeah, great question. And it's a very common question when we talk about data warehouse automation. So a traditional ETL tool is, they're pretty good at moving data from point A to point B, regardless of what kind of project you're working on. So when we, and it's ETL is one part of the puzzle. It is a decent sized piece, but it's still one part of the entire life cycle. So with an automation tool, a couple of things differ. First, we are doing a lot more than ETL. We do ELT first thing. The way that we do is we leverage your target platform to do the processing. but we're also generating the models. We're automatically creating the, generating the code, creating the indexes. We understand the methodologies. So if you say we're going to do a Kimball style dimensional model, then we understand what a dimension is, what a fact is, what's a surrogate key, how do you do the lookups, all of that is built into the tool. The best practices are built in. So to summarize, our tool is primarily targeted towards building a data warehouse and a centralized repository, whether it's a data lake on the cloud, on-prem, and also manage end-to-end of the entire lifecycle, not just the ETL.
Great, thanks Satish. That's all the time we have today for questions. Like I said, we'll follow up directly via email, and we'll reach out to answer any questions that went unanswered. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We'll also be sending out an email this week with a copy of the slides and the session recording. So please keep an eye on your inbox for that email. And thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you.